When I was 18, I was excited with the possibilities the world had to offer. It was the day of my high school graduation. My fellow classmates and I lined up as the ceremonial music began to play. We began to walk one by one down the long aisle to find our seats. The gym was packed to the brim with proud family and friends. As the long, drawn-out graduation speeches took place, I remember looking into the crowd to find my family. In the sea of people, I spotted my mom and my aunts proudly taking pictures of the ceremony. However, I did not see my brother in the crowd. I remember thinking to myself, he wouldn't miss my graduation. As I continued to scan the crowd, my name was called to come up and receive my diploma. My attention quickly switched back to the excitement of the day. After the ceremony, my mom and I drove home to get ready to host friends and family. As we entered the door, the phone began to ring. "Hello," my mom answered. I will never forget the screeching cries of pain my mother made next. She hung up the phone and fell to the floor. In her uncontrollable crying, she forced out 2 words, "Your brother." My eyes immediately swelled. She didn't have to say anything more. I knew he was gone. After I lost my older brother, I began to obsess about death. And I asked myself questions such as, do other people worry about death? And how does the grieving process play into all this? A lot of my anxiety about death is not so much about me dying, but more about how my absence will affect the people I love. After losing my brother, I watched how his death greatly affected my family. Death is scary, but the older I get, I feel like it shouldn't be something we should fear, but rather honor. I do not think losing loved ones would be so traumatic if we had more open and honest conversations on the topic, or if we treated the people we loved like every day was going to be the last day we would ever see them again. Suppression often leads to perversion, and when we push our feelings and thoughts away, they have ways of surfacing, and often they surface in equally scary ways. We fear the unknown, and the way we take away the unknown is by facing and talking about topics such as this. In this film, I explore a Buddhist beliefs on death and dying. Why have I chosen to focus on a Buddhist perspective on death and dying? As a child, I was so curious about religion. Because of this curiosity, I explored many different religions. There were always core elements that I could identify with, but they mostly left me feeling empty inside. Buddhism has always been one of those spiritual philosophies that has really spoke to me. My goal with this film is to create an open and healthy conversation around death.
Brian Worthen. I moved here 7.5 years ago from Washington, D.C. Became a Buddhist the day after I moved to Albuquerque. I came here to a noontime meditation, which is a breathing meditation, which just calms the mind. And I knew absolutely nothing about meditation. I'd been through some personal turmoil in my life back east. That's why I rebooted my life and came out here. And so I came here looking for something that would settle my mind. And I was a typical type A personality, so I was very successful in my career, which allowed me to disintegrate my life and start all over again. It's because I'd been so successful. But as a type A personality, I never sat and just rested with my thoughts. And so the first time I did that, coming in here that Wednesday, for the first time, I was fairly stunned at how much was going on back and forth in my mind. We look for the meaning of our life. When we have those times late at night, when we're sitting wondering, what does my life mean? We usually think of it in terms of our own self-cherishing, that what do others think of me? All of us, when we go through tragedies in our life, that we look for something beyond ourselves, something that has a higher meaning. And my life, as a lot of Americans are, was completely built around things like our career, our material goods, our 401k. That's the way we judge ourselves. That's the way we think that society judges us. And when we go through those periods of turmoil, we find out, and I found out, that those things that I had built my life around for 50 years were meaningless. And there are things like anger, jealousy, spite, envy, hatred, aversion. Those are not our natural state. Our natural state is peace and calm and tranquility and love and compassion. That lies at our nature. Those other negative emotions are laid on top of those. And so we've got to strip those away to get back at what our core is. The value of our life are the simple acts of love and compassion that we commit every single day. That's what builds, that's our legacy. And that's what we take to our next life. That's the wealth that we take. It's inner wealth. So the purpose of our spiritual development here as Buddhists is to develop that wisdom sphere, to understand that we need to realize the full potential of our lives. We spend, as Buddhists, an inordinate amount of time thinking about death and meditating on death. We have an opportunity in this life to fulfill the true meaning of our lives. And the true meaning of our lives isn't by the size of our bank account, or by the car that we drive, or the house. Those are nice things to have. But when we look for the meaning of our life, the meaning of our life is built around our spiritual development, by our progress. We as Americans in particular, I think, are uncomfortable with death and the idea of death. But if we can accept that, it's one of our basic meditations that we do, which is, I may die today. We think we understand that, but we don't. Years ago, I'd worked with people who were terminal. To a person, at the end, they still would talk about something that was going to happen next month or next year, because they were still in that denial. And until we start to accept and understand our own death and what that means, and how critically important it becomes to continue that spiritual development and to realize the full potential of our lives, we'll never make progress. And the other thing that as Buddhists that we try to achieve is, at death, we want to die with a peaceful mind, because it determines our next rebirth. Because if we die with an angry mind, then we're going to have a lower rebirth. We could be born into a hell realm, or an animal realm, or hungry ghost realm. So at the very least, we want to maintain that happy mind to achieve another human rebirth, so that we can continue our spiritual development. And if we don't understand the nature of our existence and the nature of our death, we will have fear at death. And we should have fear, but it's a wisdom fear. We should fear not being prepared when we die. I think it's an uncomfortable topic for most people. And I think it makes our grief process even harder, because we don't accept it. We don't have discussions about it. Even years ago, when I worked with people who were dying, we did not have a whole lot of discussions about their death. Because when we face others' mortality, we eventually have to face our own mortality. And most people don't like thinking about our own mortality. We all have fears. We all have fears that we're going to physically suffer, or that we're going to develop some lingering long-term illness that's going to take us. But I focus on developing, as I said before, a wisdom fear. Because our fear should not be of dying, because we all are going to die. Our fear should be a wisdom fear of dying unprepared. And so all of my spiritual practice, and for all of us here as Buddhists, our focus is on preparing for our death, so that at the time of death, we're not holding anger or clutching at our prior life, that we're able to die with that peaceful mind that we need to die. From the Buddhist perspective, there are three phases to our death. When we are going through the actual active death process, our what Buddha refer to as the inner winds start to pull within, and our connection to this body. We have our consciousness, and we have this body that we've identified with. Those connections start to lessen until at the moment of death, there's a separation. So our consciousness separates from our physical body, and then that consciousness leaves the body, and it goes to a state called Bardo, B-A-R-D-O, which is an intermediate state where our consciousness has not yet connected with our next life, our next physical being that we'll inhabit. So it sort of floats in a netherworld. Then at the end of Bardo, we actually take our rebirth, and we can take rebirth in this realm or in a Buddhist Pure Land. The loss of a loved one needs to be respected. We need to understand that it's not our self-cherishing, our inward focus to grieve for them, to treasure that companionship that we had, those that love that was shared. But we should also keep the focus on their journey, because they're leaving this life, they're leaving the body that they inhabited for this portion of their journey and going on to their next life. And so our focus as Buddhists is on helping them in that next journey and making that connection. When somebody dies, we have an opportunity, as one of the teachers here had said during a teaching years ago, we have an opportunity at that time to commit the most selfless act that we'll ever commit. Because when we help somebody in this life, there's oftentimes a residual of what's in it for us. Even if it's just we want the praise and we want to notice it from other people that we've done something kind or loving or compassionate. When someone is dying or they've died, and we do mantras and we do prayers and we do purification on their behalf, it is selfless, because we can never receive anything in this life in return from that person. So we have this wonderful opportunity at that time for those that we love, for those that we're closest to do something that is an absolute pure act of kindness and compassion. When I teach here, when I've been to teaching here, a lot of the questions end up revolving around, isn't it depressing to think about death all the time? But it gives you a better appreciation of our good fortune. When good things happen, to really understand and have an appreciation for how special that is and how fleeting those moments are. And also not to dwell on the negative, because we hang on to all the bad things that happen to us and we cling to them. And if we can understand that our death is imminent, whether it's today or 40 years from now, our death is certain. It's just the time and the place is still unknown. But if we can understand and accept that in our day-to-day life, then our moments of happiness become even more joyful.